Hey guys, and welcome back to my channel. So if you were on my channel last week and you saw my horror novels by female writers that I can't stop recommending, today we are going to be doing men writing women in horror well. So if you didn't see my first video, what inspired this is my friend texted me and asked me to recommend her female authors in the horror community who could write really good female characters in horror and kind of didn't do the cliche men writing women in horror stereotype. The joke I always make is that the boobs always boobily boob in some like 80s, 70s, and 60s era horror. If you've ever read Hell House by Richard Matheson, that is a big one. That is a big one. I have had a hard time reading Matheson after reading that because I just felt there was this undertone of like misogyny in that story that was definitely a part of the times, but it's something that I feel like has definitely carried on to a lot of authors, especially during certain scenes in novels. And it's just something that I feel like as a horror community we are starting to grow out of, especially since we have so many horror writers today who do write, as from a male's perspective, write really, really strong, solid female leads. So I definitely wanted to highlight some books by some authors that I really, really enjoy that I think write very feminist literature, primarily with female leads. And if they aren't female leads, they do write women in a very, very strong way. So the boobs won't be boobily boobin'. But yeah, so again, some of these authors definitely have had their moments that I don't agree with, and there's even a book in here where I have to, I think, really describe why that book is on the list, because I think it does something really interesting and really important for like this kind of like men writing horror cliche that we have. But yeah, and a lot of these books I did read a while ago, so maybe I am overlooking a scene or forgetting a sentence, so I do apologize if that happens. But for the most part, most of these books I look back on very fondly as being very strong narratives about very strong female characters. So first up, this was actually a little hard for me to choose. So I went with The Last Time I Lied by Riley Sager. Though I have to say, pretty much every Riley Sager novel I feel like always has a great female lead. But I wanted to choose The Last Time I Lied because I felt like the premise of this story could so easily have gone in the men writing horror direction because it's about a group of teenage girls at summer camp. However, I really, really liked the way that Riley Sager put us into the mind of these kind of like insecure teenage girls trying to make friends, and I felt that it really, really was believable. And not only that, this is a great, great book. This is an amazing thriller with an awesome twist ending that I didn't see coming. It brought the book from a 4-star read because I enjoyed it throughout to an immediate 5-star because the twist was just so great. And again, the focal point for this novel becomes very, very strong women who are finding themselves, whether the women are the good guys or the bad guys. I just really, really love how Riley Sager writes his female leads, and I think The Last Time I Lied is definitely the one with the best premise for it. I'm going to read the back of this book really quickly for you guys. 2 truths and a lie. Vivian, Natalie, Allison, and Emma played it all the time at Camp Nightingale, but the games ended the night Emma sleepily watched the others sneak out of the cabin into the darkness. The last she, or anyone, saw of them was Vivian closing the cabin door, hushing Emma with a finger pressed to her lips. Now a rising star in the New York art scene, Emma turns her past into paintings. Massive canvases filled with dark, gnarled branches that cover ghostly shapes in white dresses. When the paintings catch the attention of the wealthy owner of Camp Nightingale, Francesca implores Emma to return to the newly reopened camp as an art instructor. Wouldn't she like to put the past to rest? Familiar faces in the same dark lake haunt Nightingale, where Emma is even assigned to the same cabin she slept in 15 years ago. But not everything is the same. The only security camera is pointed directly at Emma's door, and long-hidden cryptic clues that Vivian left behind begin to surface. Soon, Emma finds herself sorting through the lies from the past while facing the mysterious threats in the present. And the closer she gets to the truth about Camp Nightingale, the more she realizes that closure could come at a deadly price. Again, almost all of the major players in this novel are women. And I just love that. And that's, again, a kind of that's something that you don't see quite as much in his other novels. There are definitely like male protagonists, but never the like lead in most of his books. And I think his latest novel, The Only One Left, is another great example of Riley Sager writing really interesting, really strong female leads, but I definitely think that this one's probably his best. out of the ones that I've read. I have yet to read 2 of his novels, but out of all of the ones that I've read, I really love that one. Okay, next, so I had to put this on the list, especially because this was, what, written in the 90s, I believe? 80s? 80s. This was 1988. So we're going to talk about Silence of the Lambs. And I don't think I need to read the back of this book because I think everybody knows the premise for Silence of the Lambs, whether you've seen the movie or read the book. This is the second book in like the Hannibal Lecter series. There are 4 in total, I think. But I do think that Clarice Starling is one of the most badass females ever written. And I really like this story because I do think that she's a very strong lead female. But I do also feel like she is kind of in this men's world. And I love that we went from Will being a lead in Red Dragon, the first book in the series, to this book where we do have a female take the forefront, and she works alongside the villain of the previous novel, sort of, to kind of solve this Buffalo Bill murder. Obviously, women have awful things happen to them because this is about a serial killer who does target women, but that is balanced really, really well by how powerful Clarice Starling is. I also do like that she is kind of a rookie in the force during this story, and you see her kind of growing. So a lot of her insecurities don't deal with the fact that she is necessarily a woman, but the fact that she is new. And there are definitely some scenes, especially the scene where you see her kind of identifying the moth from one of the victims, where she kind of feels like she's in a man's world, and she has this really amazing moment where she kind of speaks up for herself and just kind of nails what needs to be done and does her job and does it extremely well, and I love that scene so much. It's such a perfect way to, it's such a perfect microcosm for how Clarice is as a character overall in this story. And obviously, if you've seen Silence of the Lambs, just the way that she, sirens, just the way that she handles taking on the case and using her background in psychology to get where she is. I just think she's just a brilliant character, and I just, for this being a book written in the 80s, I think it does such a good job of handling such an amazing, memorable, legendary female lead. Okay, next up, we are going to talk about my best friend's Exorcism by Grady Hendrix. Now, Grady Hendrix has his moments. He really, really does. I can't put Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires on this list because I don't actually love how he writes women in that novel. I think they're, and I've been yelled at before for my opinions on this channel, but I definitely think that he puts women in a more like homemaker scenario that kind of fit the times of the 90s, the early 90s in that story, and definitely some awful things happened to women in that book, which didn't resonate with me, but I do think that he did a very, very good job in my best friend's Exorcism, especially because in my mind, Grady Hendrix really captures the mind of teenage girls by having his 2 leads be these teenage girls. And I remember when I first read it, I was like blown away by how well a man was writing teenage girls. And I was just really, really impressed with this, especially because it is like a very heavy topic of like the idea of like your best friend being possessed, balanced with this kind of humor of like this kind of like 80s nostalgia. And I always say that Grady Hendrix is really good at balancing horror and humor, and I just felt that my best friend's Exorcism really, really captured that to a T, while still allowing any female reader to really resonate with what both of the girls at the leads, Gretchen and Abby, are going through in the story. And I was just really blown away by just how great a man was able to write teenage girls, even middle school girls. One of the opening scenes where Gretchen and Abby first become friends at a birthday party, I thought was done so well, because it was just something that I could see having happened, having had similar experiences as a kid myself. I've seen things like that happen to my sister. Just something that I like was really, really pleasantly surprised that Grady Hendrix was able to just absolutely nail. And then you kind of juxtapose it to how he wrote Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires, and there's just such a disconnect because he just really, really nailed what being a teenage girl is like, I feel like, in this book. And I guess I'm not a housewife in the 90s, so I don't necessarily know what that was like, but Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires, great book. Really had some issues with how he portrayed some of the female leads in that. Okay, next up, I talk about this book all the time on my channel because I adore it. This is No One Gets Out Alive by Adam Neville. This is one of the most feminist books I have ever read. I'm going to read the back of the book for this one. Okay. When Stephanie moves to a notoriously cheap neighborhood of Birmingham, she's happy to find an affordable room for rent that's just large enough not to deserve her previous room's nickname, the Cell. The eccentric, albeit slightly overly friendly, landlord seems nice and welcoming. The ceilings are high, and all of the other tenants are also girls. Things aren't great, but they're stable. Or at least that's what she tells herself when she impulsively hands over the money to cover the first month's rent and decides to give it a go. But soon after, she becomes uneasy about her rash decision. She hears things in the night, feels them, things, or people who aren't there in the light, who couldn't be there, because after all, her door is locked every night and the key is still in place in the morning. Concern soon turns to terror when the voices she hears and presence she feels each night become hostile. It's clear that something very bad has happened in this house, and something even worse is happening now. Stephanie has to find a way out before whatever's going on in the house finds her first. No One Gets Out Alive will chill you straight through to the core. A cold, merciless, fear-inducing nightmare to the last page. A word of caution, don't read this one in the dark. This book is enormous. This book is like 550 pages. You will read it so quickly, and it is so scary. And what makes it scary is even though it is a ghost story, it is about a haunted building. It is the men that trap the women in this building that are by far the scariest. And they are scary. And the fear that our lead faces is so genuine, and it is bolstered by the fact that she can see ghosts who have experienced similar things as her. But I just thought that this was such a great way to parallel a haunting story and a supernatural event with horrors that happen in real life and how it can affect women living on their own, especially women who become beholden to men in positions of power over them. And I loved this book. It is so well done. The way Adam Neville writes such a strong, independent lead who at some points goes against her better judgment and then has to figure out her way out of it. It resonates so well with that feeling that you get when you're walking alone to your car at night and you have your keys out and you're like, you know what? Maybe I should really be alert tonight. Like, you just get that feeling, and that's what makes this book scary. And I was really stunned that a man actually wrote this, because he really does capture a lot of things that women have to think about every single day that a lot of times men don't. And I absolutely love and adore this book. It's very, very, very scary. The first half, I think, is definitely the scariest. The second half is very cool. Adam Neville always kind of splits his books into two separate halves. One where it's like almost realistic, and then the other where it kind of gets like crazy and like cosmic-y. But I think this is the best thing that he's ever written, and it's definitely the one that I resonate with the most, and it's also the one that scared me the most. So I absolutely love No One Gets Out Alive. You guys probably knew this one was coming, but we have to talk about My Heart is a Chainsaw. The entire Indian Lake trilogy. I just ordered book 3, so I'm going to be reading that probably right after I finish The Reformatory by Tananarive Due. I'm reading that right now. I'm like almost halfway done. But I had to talk about My Heart is a Chainsaw because this is the book that made me enjoy Stephen Graham Jones's writing. So if you've been on my channel for a while, you probably know that this is the story about a teenage girl who is a huge fan of horror and is convinced that her town is about to become a setting for like a 1980s style slasher. I love this book. I think the reason I started to enjoy Stephen Graham Jones's writing is because I really didn't love his kind of gonzo meta style of writing. It's very, very literary in a way that I don't necessarily enjoy, but when he writes through the lens of a 17-year-old girl, all of a sudden I'm just like, I get it. I'm here. I see this. And I just love Jade. Jade is, again, very similar to my best friend's Exorcism. A very well-crafted, very believable, kind of misfit teenage girl navigating life. And her life is very, 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 very difficult, and it's very hard, and she's had to go through some horrible, horrible things to get where she is. And I think the way that Stephen Graham Jones writes Jade is amazing, especially when you compare her to Letha, who is this like just beautiful, popular girl who you don't really see has had as much of a hard life as Jade. And I just love the way that this entire trilogy paints Jade's past, and as you go further into the books, paints other women with similarly difficult past, and just how he is able to just do such a great job of beautifully talking about something that is devastating and hard that women have faced, and doing it in a way that doesn't feel like you're just kind of being bashed over the head with like, this is wrong and this is hard and this is like a struggle. But it's like, no, we are not painting these women as victims. We are painting them as survivors, and we are painting them as final girls. And I love that that is the heart of this entire series. And I just think Jay Daniels is one of the best characters in horror, and I hope they make this into a movie because I would love to see her on the screen. And she, in my opinion, is currently the final girl of horror, and I think she's deserved that title because just going through life and making it out, as well as going through these kind of slasher horrific scenes and also making it out, she really is the final girl of both life and the movie. So love Stephen Graham Jones for this trilogy. Okay, next up we have Rosemary's Baby by Ira Levine. This book is so good. This book was written in what, like 1968, I want to say, 1967. I'm obviously not going to go through the plot of Rosemary's Baby. I imagine that we all know what it is. I was surprised at how well written Rosemary was. I really did go into this thinking it was going to have kind of this lens of a man writing a female from the 60s. And she is kind of this housewife who has this overbearing husband who has basically put her into this pigeonholed housewife position of, you're going to decorate the home and you're not going to have a job and you're going to make me supper and you're going to be the mother of our children, and like that is what is expected of you, and we don't want you reading certain books, and we don't want you learning certain things, and we don't want you acting in certain ways. And that is all very much there, but that's the bad guy. That's the bad guy saying all of this. And Rosemary is just such a badass in this, and I just love her. And I love how she is depicted both as a very strong, independent woman, even in like the dire situation that she is, and then I love how they depict her as a mom. And I'm just gonna kind of leave it at that because I love the ending of this story, because it really is this kind of concept of like, does a mom just, does a good mom just love her child no matter what? And that's kind of the larger question that we get at the end of the story. And I just loved how Rosemary was written. Love how Mia Farrow plays her in the film. I think this is a great example of a film doing perfect justice to a book, though I do think the book is slightly better just because you get more. The movie doesn't really change anything, but it does eliminate a couple extra scenes. And I just absolutely loved this story. And I even Mistis Castevet kind of being like the lead antagonist, I kind of like that it's kind of her doing everything instead of her husband. You really get like the witchy vibes of like a woman in a cult, you know? And so I just love this. I was blown away by the fact that how feminist it was for the time that it was written, and that to me is very groundbreaking and something that I think horror does really, really well. I love kind of giving women voice and the strength that this novel does, and it was as good as everybody says it is. Like, it really, really holds up. Okay, so I know that early Stephen King has a lot of moments that we kind of wish maybe he didn't write in some of his earlier novels. Some of his scenes, some of the way that he writes about women in the 70s is probably wouldn't really fly today, but I do think he makes up for it as the times have gone on with Gerald's Game. Gerald's Game is one of my favorite things that Stephen King has ever written. I think it's absolutely amazing. I think it's beautiful, and he was inspired by I believe 3 women in his life, one of them being his wife for certain, and he based the character of Jessie, who is the lead in this story, on a lot of those women's experiences, and had those women read, or at least his wife definitely, read through this to make sure that he was capturing what it would feel like to kind of be in that situation as a woman. This is the story of a woman who goes on a end of season vacation with her husband. They're playing some games. She's handcuffed to a bed, and he all of a sudden has a heart attack, and she is trapped there, and it becomes this survival tale of how she is going to escape. And while that is happening, she has to basically relive some of the most traumatic experiences from her past. I think this book is beautiful. I was blown away by how scary it was. Again, this is one of those books where like the reality is so much scarier than the supernatural events that happen in it. And I do think that the book is much stronger than the film, even though I love Mike Flanagan, just because you get a wider range of Jesse's past that the movie didn't have time to put into it. This is not a very long book. It's about 400 pages, but you get a lot about Jessie and her childhood and the traumatic things that she went through. And I think Stephen King did a really amazing job of writing such an incredible woman who pretty much is the entire book. The entire book is this woman alone in a room, and it is so captivating of her just kind of dealing with her life or death situation and the trauma from her past, and I adore this book. And I think it makes up for a lot of the things that Stephen King wrote early on in his youth that might not translate well today. I think this one is absolutely phenomenal. Trigger warnings, trigger warnings, trigger warnings. Definitely be prepared for this book if you're going to read it, but I think it's fantastic. Okay. This is the book that I know people are going to be like, what the hell? Because when I first started reading this, I was like, what the hell? This is Heart-Shaped Box by Joe Hill. This, I think, is the best thing Joe Hill has ever written. This is one of my favorite books ever written. It's also one of the books I don't talk about that much on this channel, so we're bringing it back today, because I used to talk about it all the time when I first started, but haven't mentioned it in a while. This might have been Joe Hill's, like, first book. It was definitely, I think, his first, like, big release. It's from, like, 2007, I want to say, because My Chemical Romance was popular when he wrote this. And by popular, I mean, like, The Black Parade had just come out. Anyway, this is the story of I'm just going to read the back of the book. So it says, age and death metal rock legend Judas Coin is a collector of the macabre, a cookbook for cannibals, a used hangman's noose, a snuff film. But nothing he possesses is as unique or as dreadful as his latest purchase off the internet, a one-of-a-kind curiosity that arrives at his door in a black heart-shaped box, a musty dead man's suit still inhabited by the spirit of its late owner. And now, everywhere Judas Coin goes, the old man is there, watching, waiting, dangling a razor on a blade from his bony hand. Okay, so if you've never heard of this book before, or you don't know this book, you're probably like, why is this on this list? The two female leads in this book are freaking amazing. You have to know that that is what's going to happen going into this, because Judas Coin, he's not an amazing dude. He is very misogynist. Think like hair metal bands. Think Tommy Lee. Think the 80s rock star stereotype. He fits it to a T. And the way he talks about women, Judas Coin, the main character, is awful. And then Joe Hill uses the entire book to show him that women are the fucking best. And I love Florida in this book. I think she's a really incredible and really tragic character, and I love how her story is kind of paralleled with Georgia's story. I think Georgia is one of the most badass women in horror lit. I think she is awesome. She's my favorite character that Joe Hill has ever written. But I remember reading this and having this like nauseous taste in my mouth, being like, wow, I can't believe this book was written in 2007 and this is how we're writing about women. And then you kind of get to the halfway point where you see the flip of the switch, and all of a sudden you start to, Judas Coin starts to see women not as objects, because they're not. And you get some of the coolest, most badass, strong, feminist, amazing characters. And I love Georgia so much. And the fact that they're named Georgia and Florida is so important to the character development in the story. And I always think about Georgia. I always recommend this book to people who are like, I hate like men writing women like they're objects. I'm always like, read Heart-Shaped Box, because you're going to have that like visceral reaction of like how much you don't like it, and then you're going to get to halfway through the book and all of a sudden everything's going to change and it's going to be amazing, and you can read this book in like 2 days. It's so good. I love this book so much. Okay, I have two more. So next up we have The Prettiest Girl in the Grave by Christopher Triana. Do not read Gone to See the Riverman if you are looking for books that are going to be like, woo, painting women in good light, because the one of the main characters in that book is awful. And I haven't read Full Brutal yet. I've heard Full Brutal I need to read, but I really love The Prettiest Girl in the Grave because it is primarily the story about just a bunch of women surviving a gauntlet. And like a gauntlet literally in like a mausoleum. And I think it's awesome. And again, we get men writing believable teenage girls. And I really loved that. I thought this was a really fun, this is a very dark book, but I think there's a lot of fun, humorous moments to it. And I just love the juxtaposition, again, of teenage girls from Today versus Teenage Girls, I believe from, I want to say, the 90s, and kind of how he just parallels both of those stories. And again, almost every single character in this novel is a girl, either a teenage girl or a mother. And after having read some of the really just more intense and brutal work from Christopher Triana, I was really happy to see this book and how fun and lighthearted while still like crazy gruesome it can be, but again centered entirely around an almost entirely female cast. Even like the bad guys are women, and there's kind of this really like funny nod to like, again, like the prettiest girl in the grave, and like this commentary on like beauty pageants and beauty standards, and just kind of making it really like macabre and scary and turning it into like Survivor, like the TV show, but with teenage girls. And I really loved this book. It was so much fun. Very different from what I usually read from Triana, and I loved it so much. That being said, if you read That Night in the Woods by Triana, you're not going to be like, that was a strong female lead. You're going to sit there and you're going to be like, what are you doing? What was that ending? Why did that character do that? A woman would not do that. But this one I do think he does pretty well. Okay, and last but not least, Malignant Summer by Tim Meyer. I love this book. However, this book is on the list for one reason. This is your typical coming-of-age story. A group of children have to battle some kind of cosmic entity. Think of like Black Mouth by Ronald Malfi. Think of it. All of that stuff. But what I love about this is we get the cliche bully character. You get your Henry Bowers character in this book, and she's a girl. And she's the best character in the entire novel. And I feel like usually you get these bullies in these coming-of-age stories, and they kind of follow the Henry Bowers character. You kind of get the bully who's bad, and they become a bigger villain, and they do bad things, and blah, 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 blah. Even if their backstory is tragic, they're irredeemable. You don't get that in this. And I love that the bully is a girl, because it's so different, because you still have the general setup of like the young, I think they're like 12 in this, like the group of misfits. They're mainly guys, and you have a girl as the lead bully. And you get more backstory on her than any other character, and she has the best character development and the best story arc, and she doesn't have the run-of-the-mill story that you would normally get with your bully in the coming-of-age story, even if it's not horror. Like, and I just loved how refreshing that was, to have such a cool and unique character take on that role in a completely different way. And you know what? Maybe that's how a girl would react in that situation, instead of a boy. And I just love her. Her name is Jewel, and I just absolutely love her in this book. Malignant Summer is an amazing book overall, but her being one of the lead characters and taking on such a different role for the kind of plot that you think she's going to have, I just thought was absolutely fantastic. This is the best thing that Tim Meyer has ever written. It's like 600 pages, and I read the whole thing in like 4 days. I couldn't put it down. It was so good. But again, he writes a very convincing teenage girl. And it's so weird having so many like male authors who, like, a lot of times I feel like they don't write adult women 100% accurately, but you somehow get into the mind of a teenage girl, and they do a really, really, really good job. And I absolutely love Malignant Summer and highly recommend it. I will always recommend that book. I think it's also one of the most perfect summer reads, and it's set in like the 90s in like a beach town in New Jersey. Like, it's just great. Anyways, those are my 10 novels of men writing women in horror well. They're not all going to be perfect, but I think these authors did a really, really good job in these books, and I hope you guys check them out. Anyways, as always, I try to post every Monday and Thursdays, and if you enjoyed these videos, please hit the like and subscribe buttons down below, and I'll catch you all in the next one. Mwah!